This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Scoresheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hello, and welcome to another Scoresheet podcast. Very happy to say that today I'm going to be chatting with Nick Minnix, who's the baseball editor for KFFL.com, and it's a gentleman I've gotten to know pretty well over the last couple of years while going to Ron Chandler's Arizona Fall League conference in early November. So I got to spend last weekend with Nick. How are you today, Nick?
I'm fantastic. I'm not as good as I was in Arizona, just because it's back to the daily grind, but I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, Arizona was 80 degrees, and I'm watching it rain outside, and it's supposed to be snowing in my parking lot tonight. And I'm working. So, yeah, for all those reasons, Arizona was pretty nice. As long as we mentioned Arizona, let's start out by talking about maybe a couple of the players we saw in the AFL that kind of jumped out at you as maybe a guy to keep an eye on. For those of you, most of you probably, that have never been to an AFL game, there's usually a whopping 75 or 100 people in the stands, about half of which are from our conference. Well, maybe 200 people, and we have 100. So folks like Nick and I make a point of sitting literally in the first or second row behind home plate. So if you want to see a guy, we're up close and personal. So what did you think of the AFL?
The one thing that struck me, first of all, immediately the player list wasn't quite as exciting as it's been in the last couple of years prior. So, I think, we got to see Bryce Harper and a couple of other guys who,
Mike Trout.
Bigger names just in general that, we know were kind of almost destined for stardom or something close to that. Some players who were kind of expected to have big roles coming into a season. And I don't think the players like that were, so much the case with those guys this year. But I think just in general, some players who kind of stood out, or, we talked about some guys like Reimer Liriano, Jonathan Singleton, Jared Kosar. I think specifically a couple of the Astros' prospects kind of stuck out to me, but, glad to talk about some of those guys.
Liriano kind of, I guess, jumped out at me. I can't remember. I think I just saw him hit a couple balls really hard, and being nowhere near a real scout, that's about all it takes to impress me. So what did you think of him specifically?
Yeah, your scouting ability is kind of on par with mine, and that's basically what I saw. I saw him hit the ball hard. I saw him hit it to all fields. I think that's I look for that kind of thing. I look for players who learn that kind of thing when they're young, to go the other way or willing to go with a pitch. And that's what stood out to me about him. He drove a ball. I believe it was in the Rising Stars game into the right center field gap. Might have been his first at bat, and it was just, it was a thing of beauty. That's the kind of thing I love to see, that kind of thing from young hitters. I think that's too often it's missing in their game. And once you see them, once they've been exposed for several years in major league pitching, they just kind of tend to, kind of go one way or the other. And I think that to show that kind of discipline early, it makes me think that it's something that he can kind of maintain. So yeah, he was impressive, and that's kind of what I saw from Jonathan Singleton. And when he faced James Paxton, left-handed pitcher, with some heavy stuff. And Paxton wasn't really sharp in the AFL, and particularly in the Rising Stars game, but I was just impressed with the way Singleton kind of stayed in. He's a left-handed hitter. He stayed in on Paxton. At one point, he drove a ball to the left, beat a ball into the ground to left field for a base hit. And I think that just kind of demonstrated to me that he's got the ability to hit left-handed pitching. Just in general, I thought he had some good plate appearances. So, his numbers weren't really eye-popping, but I thought he had some good at-bats, and I think that's the kind of thing. He's got, 30 home run potential, especially playing there in Houston. So in a couple of years, he might be kind of a low-grade fantasy star or somebody to keep an eye on.
Well, especially if he's in Houston's organization, where it's not like he's blocked.
Right. Brett Wallace demonstrated some somewhat promising things once they finally called him up last year. He's obviously a bit of a butcher with the glove, and he can play at both corners a little bit. But I think that if anybody really truly emerges that's a real first base candidate like Singleton, they tried him in the outfield before. That's not going to work. They've already kind of given up on that. He's got the potential to take over that first base spot and be a fixture at that. That's something that they've lacked ever since they got rid of Lance Berkman.
Yeah. Well, and he ought to be okay at first. He was good enough athlete. They tried him in the outfield, so I don't think he's a DH type. He can at least probably handle first base in the National League.
Yeah, definitely think he can, yeah.
Yeah, and another guy, I don't know why I paid attention to this guy, Nick Franklin, is he kind of lost whatever prospect status he had, or?
It kind of seems like it. I think that there's just, there's not as much enthusiasm about it, and I can kind of understand that. I mean, he wowed a lot of people last year at the AFL with just, I mean, I think he was tattooing some balls. He hit a couple of screaming liners, I want to say, in the Rising Stars game, and just really seemed to impress folks. And I think that, I mean, from my general understanding of him, his development has been kind of curbed. I mean, I think he's been kind of considered an over-aggressive hitter, or is not really kind of captured the kind of plate discipline that Seattle had hoped for. But that seems to be a problem up and down their organization. So I'm not really completely ruling him out. I think that they have a number of middle infield prospects. Maybe he gets lost in the shuffle. It's kind of hard to see. I mean, he may be the type of player who needs to go to another organization, but I wouldn't completely write him off. I just don't know that he's necessarily, going to be a top-end guy.
Because my memory's right. He was there last year, and he was one of the 3 or 4 guys, well, Harper and Trout were kind of in their own realm. But he was one of those guys we were all saying, gee, he'll probably be up pretty soon. And then he's down to this year, and everybody's saying, meh.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit of the wind comes out of the sails. Again, I think that, his control of the strike zone just is a little bit lacking. I guess it's not surprising for players to have such a great offensive performances in the AFL. Maybe that's just, something that didn't carry over. I guess it's hard to say. I think it's hard to gauge. That's another reason I don't really necessarily, I don't like to look at the numbers of players in the AFL so much as if you do get an opportunity to see these guys up close, it's kind of more about what kind of little things do you notice. And particularly, some of these players you'd like to think are there more to work on some things and as opposed to just, hey, I can hit 500 in this league and hit 10 home runs and be the MVP and hey, it's time to call me up. I mean, there's a lot of pitching mistakes made in that league. I think we saw that. So, I look for more of the little things and players who are willing to demonstrate that kind of thing as opposed to the numbers.
Yeah, I think if you're a fantasy player and you're really into scouting minor league numbers, that, like you said, the AFL is probably not numbers you want to be using for any kind of draft list, especially the pitcher numbers. But because a lot of those pitchers are either, I think, tired because they've been playing a lot, or they're working on some pitch that is not really their bread and butter, but they're throwing it every other pitch because that's what the coach says. So I think spring training numbers, or even maybe Dominican League numbers, where those guys are trying to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you can look at some numbers, and numbers that we tend to talk about using for projection, things like that, just, strikeout to walk ratios and things like that. Some of those things, they can be beneficial, but again, it's like you said, if they're working on things, a lot of the guys that are they're coming off an injury or they're just fatigued. It happens with the hitters, especially, players who play kind of taxing positions on the field. Just you don't know entirely what kind of condition these guys are coming in with. So, I think that the statistics certainly not the best measure of what kind of player this guy is going to be in 2013. Definitely not in future seasons, but it's like everything. It's the answer to how useful is this information is. Well, it depends, and I think that it's a matter of piecing and get together the statistical information with what you've observed and what his reputation is coming in and stuff like that. And until you really put that kind of picture together for anybody, I don't think you can really form a big picture thing. So I try to look at it all, in the context as opposed to just, what did you do this time around in the AFL? Well, it's, the numbers don't really tell me a whole lot by themselves.
Right. But on the other hand, it's great sitting 10, 20 feet from those guys. If any of you are ever thinking of going to one of Ron Chandler's AFL conferences, we all have a really good time, and it is really fun because these guys, they may not always be the Mike Trouts, but they're pretty good prospects generally, and unless you pay $1,000 at a major league game, this is your last chance to sit 20 feet from them probably.
His conferences are a great time. It's a lot of people who they love baseball and they can't stop talking about baseball, They like to listen to you talk about baseball just as much as they like to talk about it. So, I think that it's a lot of fun. We get to get together and have a great. We get to have some good laughs too. It's an all around great 3 days.
Yeah, no, it's a great 3-day weekend. Well, moving to a slightly different thing, baseball in general is, I think, one of the best things about fantasy baseball and why there are so many keeper leagues is because there's no real off season. I was looking at KFFL just a few minutes ago, and there's something like 100 player notes just in the last 24 hours on your site. All talking about trades or injuries or guys moving up in the organization. You just don't really get that in the other sports a week after their Super Bowl ends or their NBA final ends.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, just a week ago, we're talking about the Giants' sweep, and organizations are already moving into plans for 2013. The Red Sox are completely overhauling. They're interested in every free agent available, it seems like already. KFFL, we don't always, we're not always pumping out content every single day. But there's always the hot at the wire and the news and things like that you got to keep track of. And that's the one thing we specialize in, is we want to keep people abreast of what's going on. Because, I mean, again, like news, it just provides context. You don't know which of it to believe. And a lot of times rumors around this time of the season, they don't seem to matter much to fantasy players. But I think, again, these are some little things that add context to me. What direction are organizations looking to go in? What opportunities are going to be for players down the road for playing time. And if you see an organization that, for instance, doesn't address its outfield depth or its pitching depth or something like that, that's the ones that you start looking at for, which prospects might have a greater opportunity in the upcoming season, things like that. So it always helps pay attention. We're always on top of that stuff, and it won't be long before we start, throwing out our hot stove content ourselves. It's with the Winter League meetings going on, it's going to be a hot and heavy time, and slowly building toward a pretty big winter.
Yeah, well, you guys got to take a little break from content. It's kind of a year, like I said, baseball's like a year-round job if you're a content writer. It's not just, I go nuts for 17 weeks of the NFL season, and then I won't have anything to do for 7 months. But even just reading the news, there's always surprises. Like Justin Upton was talked about a bunch at this AFL conference, and all the, quote, experts seem to be saying, oh, he's going to be in the MVP running next year. And then meanwhile, for the last couple of days, I read through these KFFL news notes. It seems like every team in baseball is talking about trading for him. So, which makes me wonder, what is Arizona thinking? That they've got him under control for 3 years for kind of reasonable amount of money. I don't really understand. If I had him, I wouldn't be looking to trade him anyhow.
Upton he's an interesting case because, from what I understand, I've heard from a couple of people, and just from the news that I've read, you can kind of read between the lines sometimes that, and obviously, he's received his share of criticism from ownership, things like that. He's not necessarily had the best relationship with the organization, and I know how good this guy is. Talent-wise, he's one of the best in baseball right now. There's no question about that. But, that's not the sole thing that goes into having a good season. I like to think that he's going to bounce back at least a little bit this coming season, but I'm not ready to, automatically count this guy as an MVP candidate once again, like we thought he would be last season. He's still in his early to mid-20s. There's a lot he's got to learn. Plate discipline is something that he's improved in his last couple of seasons, but is not necessarily, it's not top quality yet. He's not necessarily learned how to put that together. So the combination of things and the off-field distractions, that tends to wear on players, especially young players who are not really sure about their standing with an organization. I don't think really the potential for trade. If I'm Arizona and I want to get the most out of Upton, they've already said that they're probably not going to trade him. But I believe I even just read that Kevin Towers is, he's kind of we're probably going to keep this guy, but it almost sounds as if he's saying, we're going to keep him just because we know that teams probably aren't going to pony up enough to get him from us. But we're willing to part with him if people are, it's like, I want to be more positive for his outlook. I want to hear that, look, we want this guy with our organization, for the next X number of years. This is a guy that we envision being here. Now, that said, obviously you can't say anybody's untouchable, but I think there's just a different way that you can handle each thing. It's pretty clear that Arizona is willing to part with him in the right scenario, and it just makes it. I guess I get the impression that he's not necessarily a 100% wanted piece there, and I think that players pick up on that kind of thing. I just think to me it's kind of taking the shape of a situation where he needs to end up with another organization to kind of be in a better situation. So, again, these things are intangible. It's hard to read and know exactly how much it's gonna affect his performance. But those things we've heard plenty of cases before where off the field stuff has affected players' performance, and I don't think you can discount what happened last season and say automatically that he's going to rebound.
Yeah, well, it just seems strange to me. I mean, I guess there's two ways to motivate a player. You can threaten to trade him and hope he steps his game up. So I haven't seen that work very well. I guess I'm more of a fan of the positive. Oh, instead of talking about trading him, you start talking about, well, we'd love to sign him to a 7-year extension or something like that. But yeah, and of course, just because there's trade rumors, they might be telling these teams, they might call Detroit and say, hey, you want Upton, but by the way, we want Verlander in return. So that's not really a legitimate trade offer. It's just kind of a rumor.
Right.
But I've always liked him and Jay Bruce are kind of linked in my mind a little. They've both been around forever. So some people probably are thinking, oh, they're grizzled veterans. They're both, especially Upton, really young yet. I could see both of those guys just having 10 years of great times, even though they're maybe been a little disappointing so far. Yeah,
I mean, I think I view Upton as kind of the same case. I mean, I think that there's no question. I mean, he has a better all-around game than his brother, for instance. I mean, he seems to, again, I think he's definitely shown some progress in control of the strike zone. To me, that's something that the older you get, the harder it is to learn, that kind of thing. And BJ Upton he almost is what he is. You're going to take 150 plus strikeouts from him. And he's just, he's going to present trouble in other ways. He's not as polished defensively. Upton plays in right field, so it's not an up the middle position. But, I mean, he plays a really good right field, very strong arm, things like that. I think that, he's a solid piece for somebody for the next 10 years. But, it's the off the field stuff that becomes a problem. I mean, I think Arizona's not completely sold on him, and I think they've made that clear because of, from what I've heard, there's kind of been a little bit of a divide between him and some players that they got rid of. It was kind of a clique situation there, and I think that when you're looking to get rid of the players that he's kind of bonded with, and then you kind of say, he's either going to fall in line eventually or we're going to get rid of him, kind of thing. It just doesn't seem always like it's going to work out for the best for both parties. He may be what they want him to be, but it won't necessarily be the way he wants to go about it. And I think it sounds like he needs to move on to another organization and be just a better part of, I think you have a better chance of seeing that kind of production from him if he was to move on.
Yeah. Well, as a Giants fan, I'd be happy to have either Upton, though I don't see I don't see the Giants giving up whatever Arizona must be asking for. BJ Upton, though, as a Giants fan, if they lose Pagan, which I don't assume they're going to give a ton of money to Pagan, but you never quite know. Sabian likes to reward people. But I would, BJ Upton's going to go somewhere, and I would think playing with the defending World Series champs would be kind of nice. And if the Giants lose Pagan, they have some money to play with. That's the lesser Upton, but I'd be happy to see him.
Yeah, he'd be an interesting fit, I think, there. I think that it'd be interesting to see Upton play in the National League, and especially the West. I mean, obviously you talk about some up and down, some tough ballparks to hit in, per se, and some good pitching out there. But I mean, I think that his game, he probably is a better fastball hitter than he is, a breaking ball hitter, I would say. I mean, you've seen him,
flail away.
Yeah. So, I think, and that's, honestly, that's purely a guess. I haven't watched a lot of BJ Upton myself, being that he's an AL guy, and most of the time I get NL games, but, I think it'd be interesting to see him play, in the National League. And I think, the Giants could be a good fit. I think the Phillies could be a good fit. A couple of other organizations I thought of, I think that would make an interesting fit for him.
Well, he does seem like a guy that will benefit from an organization change. And getting back to Nick Franklin, Seattle, there are just organizations that do not seem to develop players. And, Seattle has not got a great track record for developing hitters, that's for sure. So, yeah, sometimes you see a guy get traded and you just think, oh, he went to St. Louis. They got a great order, or Atlanta. I better draft that guy. Atlanta's going to turn him into a Cy Young candidate if he's a pitcher. Yeah. Well, folks, if you've never been to KFFL.com, I would recommend it. It's got lots of breaking news, lots of trade rumors, and then a ton of content. Like most sports sites, it's a little more football-oriented right now, but over the course of the year, it does a ton of baseball work, mainly thanks to Nick. So give it a shot. And I'll run into you here one day. We're both in California. Maybe we'll run into each other sometimes outside the AFL.
Yeah, sounds good. We look forward to that, and appreciate the plug and all that. Yeah, we're football, as you said, football heavy right now, but we're we're already, I mean, we've jumped into baseball projections and things like that. So we're, it's never a dull moment as far as the baseball goes. And, looking forward to another chance to get together.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Well, plus, I mean, most of us are football fans this time of year too. I've always been a little more of a baseball person, but I certainly follow the NFL, certainly have, I think, 5 fantasy football teams. So, yeah, football news is good too. Yeah, well, good chatting with you. And thanks for being on.
Yeah, you as well. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
All right.